Hi, I'm Little Red Book, and welcome to the Legendary and Green Team, a weird little spinoff where patrons of the Legendarium discuss topics and books our favorite podcast hasn't gotten around to yet. Please consider supporting Craig and the crew over on Patreon, and also join the conversation on Reddit and Discord. With me today, I have Befuddled Panda,
Hi, everybody.
and I have Hurinfan,
Hello.
and I have first-time panelist Colonel Rabbit.
Hello.
Welcome.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you.
And also, Colonel Rabbit's my son's math tutor, by the way. Today we're chatting The Curse of Chalion by Lois McMaster Bujold. We'll start spoiler-free, but swiftly move into spoilers with ample warning. But before we get started, and you think that you want to read this book, you're going to go online, you're going to use the Googles, and the Google is going to tell you there's a book that takes place before that book. It's called the Hallowed Hunt. It only takes place before chronologically, and I would strongly recommend that you read Curse of Chalion first, because it slowly introduces you into the magic systems that exist in this world. And now we're going to start the review, everybody. So, Kazriel, a former galley slave, is seeking to reestablish himself in the house of his former patroness. And he's given the very difficult job of tutoring the sister of the heir of the realm and breaking a curse on the royal house. So, let's start by giving this book a rating of 5 stars. And here's where I normally say gentlemen, but now I can say ladies and gentlemen.
So I guess I'll go first then. This is my second time reading. Oh, Hurinfan here. This is my second time reading Curse of Chalion. I first heard about it from Little Red Book from our what was that episode called? Lesser known
I don't remember
or
exactly. It was
underappreciated.
episode?
It was like
Yeah,
episode
something.
1.
I think that's
It was
your
like our
first episode, yeah.
Yeah. And I actually read every book that everybody else recommended, and this was my second favorite. But when I first read it, I don't know, 6 months ago, I gave it 4 stars, and I liked it a lot. But I reread it for this podcast, and it bumped it up to 5 stars for me. That is one of the best books I've read in I don't know, this year definitely.
Panda?
Yeah, I can go. So this is my first time reading Curse of Chalion and my first Bujold book. I had not heard of her at all before joining the Legendarium Discord. So I really didn't know what I was getting myself into when I picked up this book. But I really, really enjoyed it. I think it's close to 5 stars. I do have one criticism of it, but it's like 4.95.
Rabbit?
Yeah. I would probably give around 4.5 stars for this. This is my first Bujold book as well, or her first Bujold fantasy book. I've read a couple of her sci-fi now, in my camera's version, but yeah. So I think that basically my impression on Bujold is she's fantastic at writing political intrigue, and I didn't think I would enjoy political intrigue until I started reading her books. And kind of my requirement for like a 4 or 5 star book is I want to recommend it to people. I want other people to read it. And this is like, and I want to talk about it with people. And as soon as I finished this book, I was like, Red, you have to talk to me about this book. So definitely 4 or 5 stars for me.
I don't think that you guys have to guess what I'm going to rank it. But yeah, it's a 5-star book. It's great. So it has a very different start than most fantasy novels. It has a very different type of main character. We're not talking about this young kid who gets discovered or whatever. He's a middle-aged man. He has history. How do you feel about that approach? Did you like the different approach?
Okay, yeah. I love it. Like you said, most fantasy books are usually teenage or 20-somethings. And I honestly can't think of many where there's one protagonist or just a few. I'm talking about Melanzon again, but it's got tons of middle-aged characters. But
No Malazan here.
Okay. But most books that you read are 20-somethings or teenagers, and so finding something with a middle-aged protagonist who, I don't know, is cool as Kaz, is hard to find, and so it was a bit of a breath of fresh air for me.
I agree. I mean, I knew a little bit going in because I read the synopsis, but I wasn't, like I said, I really didn't quite know what to expect. And the beginning of the book, I have to admit, like, I wasn't sure that I was going to like it because the start of it, you're like, who is this person? There's very, very little setup that is given. You're really just thrown in. You just meet this character and like you kind of just get going. So it wasn't until maybe like a couple chapters in, then I got a bit of the backstory and I was like, okay, now I'm invested in this person.
Yeah, it was a little bit the same for me. I went in completely blind. I hadn't read even a summary of it, so I was just like, who is this guy and why are we supposed to like him? But then 2-3 chapters in, I'm like, I understand why we're supposed to like him now.
So my experience with this book is that I found it at the library. I don't even know how. I was a mom. I was probably about 25, and so it was just such a nice change to have a character who I could actually kind of relate to. Like, obviously, I was 25. I didn't have nearly as much life experience, but I was like, oh, so you can be a hero of a fantasy story and also be an adult who has a life. So that's what that's what I liked about it. Any other thoughts on Kaz? Oh well, no. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, part of Kaz's charm, I think, is his life experiences, because uh, all of his the reason I like him so much is just because how smart and how thoughtful he is. I mean, it's not the only reason, but he's just filled with so much experience that he knows basically everything that's going on, and he tells people how they should act and how things are going to work because he's been there, and that's why I like him.
You don't get very many thoughtful protagonists in fantasy very often. So it's a
No.
really nice change of pace to have someone who actually thinks things through and thinks about the consequences of their actions.
Well, you get them, but they're not the person whose head you're living in. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like you'll have the wizard or whatever, but
sure.
yep. So we've mentioned that this is a political intrigue. And so Lady Sweden asked me to do a little rundown of ranks because we got thrown a whole bunch of ranks. And so Rowena is a queen, a Roya is a king, a Royce is a prince, a Royess is a princess, a Pravenkara is like a duke or an earl, and a Pravenkara is a duchess. A dowager is a rank meaning that you are the widow of um, the former Pravenkara. So like the dowager's son is the Pravenkara, and his wife is the actual Pravenkara. And so a castellaire is a minor noble, usually landowning. A sir is a knight. Divines are priests. A dedicate would be a monk, and a lay dedicate would be somebody who is taken a special vow to a certain god, but not an actual sworn to an order. And I could go into yes.
I'm just wondering if anybody actually paid attention to any of the ranks in the book, because I think
It's important.
it's important, but like I was listening on audiobook and Repo is too, so I'm wondering what he thinks, but never once thought of anybody's rank other than like, oh, they're really important and they're less important, and maybe they're religious and they're not religious, you know?
Well, everyone's pretty
I
religious in this book.
Well,
I definitely picked up on the ranks.
okay.
I got them from a Slavic perspective, so I figured. I mean, like it's not exactly 1-to-1, but the kind of patterns are the same as a lot of Russian or Slavic titles. So I picked up on that pretty quickly, and then I'd seen Dowager before. I didn't pick up a Castellar or but everything else is pretty self-explanatory for me.
Okay, well, I mean, we can cut that if you want.
Oh, no, I think it's helpful. Like I had a little confusion because even though I was reading it physically, when they were specifically only referring to people by their titles and not by their names, and even some of the names were really similar, I did have a little trouble because with the political intrigue part, it was important to know like who had what history and like what role they had in this bigger picture. So I think it's helpful to have the understanding.
Yeah, you said that they refer to people by their titles a lot. Yeah, they do that a lot, and without their other name too, and not just titles, right? So he'll sometimes refer to people by like their physical appearance, like the tall man or the thumbless man, and
Is there a thumbless man?
Yeah, the groom, one of the under.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Yes.
like that ugly
The
guy
one,
over
the one that
there.
really messed me up was Dondo and Digirno.
Yeah,
Well, because
I
it's
didn't figure them out until one
Dondo
of them was
Dondo
Dondo.
DiGiorno.
Yeah,
And then
Yeah.
what's his brother's name? It's begins with an M.
Marteau or something.
something
that was
like
an
that.
O or something.
but they called him Digirno.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And there are two of them.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
So there's a lot
I
of names.
definitely.
And there's a lot of like Ista and Isel. That's confusing too.
Bias. You know, if you're dyslexic, like it's a bit challenging.
Yeah, and Tadez, like whenever he was mentioned, I had to go back. Wait, who is he again?
That's hilarious. He's kind of important.
Oh, wait, he's important, but he never does anything.
Well, we'll save that for spoilers. Okay, so let's talk about her writing style. How do you guys feel about the way she writes? Panda?
I thought it was pretty good. There's just something about her writing that is pretty seamless. Like she's pretty careful with what words she chooses. The dialogue that she writes is very effective. Like she's able to convey so much information very concisely, so very economically, but not in like a boring info dumpy kind of way. It's very engaging. She'll do it through either conversations between people or like specific actions of people. So I found her writing to be very engaging, even though the book itself is pretty slow moving. Like the plot is pretty slow. But I didn't feel bored reading it.
Kieran?
I agree completely, and I especially want to make a note about the dialogue. Often in fantasy, that's one of my pet peeves, is for the tendency for people to talk about things that they already know about in a very unnatural way. That's, I don't know, jarring for personally me, the reader. And she doesn't do that at all. Everything felt very natural, and I really enjoyed the way the characters talk to each other. Not only that, I thought her, especially towards the end, just the way she described things were just very poetic. I don't have any examples, but I thought it was really pretty.
Okay. I definitely appreciated the prose. It's the sort of thing where it never got in the way, but it was also flowery. So kind of like the best of both worlds of the Sanderson side and the Rothfuss side of things. It wasn't lyrical, but it was pretty, but it didn't get in the way of the actual story either.
Right. I just think she's funny. She
Mhm.
has these great moments of
There's
humor.
that too.
That scene where he's walking down the road and the guards ride up behind him and they're like, "Hey, old fellow," and he's like, "Old." He just has this moment where people, and you do reach that age where somebody's gonna call you old, and you're like, the first time I got called ma'am, it was kind of a moment like that. So she's won a lot of awards, guys. How come nobody's heard of her? She's won Hugo Awards and just a ton of awards. I think she's won a Nebula. Panda wrote a list for me, and I'm not reading it. Sorry.
Before our first episode, I had never heard of her, and you said she won a Hugo. Then I'm like, wow, I can't believe I've never heard of her. But ever since I've read it, I see her name everywhere, like especially on Reddit, like on recommendation things for fantasy. It seems like her name's brought up every time, and now it's starting to get people annoyed. But before reading it, I never saw it, so I don't know if it's a like you know it when you see it, or like you see it once, so you see it everywhere kind of thing. But I don't, what are your experiences?
I mean, I still haven't really seen her name, but I'm wondering if, she's more well known in certain circles. Like I'm not very ingrained in a lot of the adult high fantasy, epic fantasy communities. The Legendarium is really the first one that I've engaged with. So it could just be like my media consumption isn't necessarily where she would be brought up. But I mean, it's like she's won 4 Hugo Awards, so she's done a lot. So I would expect her to be on like like the NPR top 100 like best sci-fi fantasy list, things like that. But I haven't really seen her.
Well, I just stumbled across her, like I said, in the library. She was like on a recommend shelf, maybe not. Maybe I was just, anyway. And I had never met anybody who had read her until Kip said something about her. And I was like, oh my God, you've actually read her? Because I have friends at work that read fantasy, and they've never ever heard of her. So, and then I think Kip and I are the ones who, yeah, he has. And I think actually it's Kip and I that are annoying everybody with recommending her on Discord. So anyway.
For me, I hadn't heard of her, but I mean, before I entered the Legendarium Discord, I probably had heard of maybe 1 or 2 Hugo Award winners, period. It's a sort of thing where the casual fantasy reader circle is very, very different from the, I guess we'd call it the literary fantasy reading circle, which has all of the Hugo Award winners. And but you think of like someone like Brandon Sanderson, one of the most popular, successful authors of all time. Has he even been nominated for a Hugo ever?
I know he hasn't won.
So they're very, very different circles, and I've never been a part of the literary side of fantasy before entering the Legendarium.
So basically, we just have better taste than everyone else. That's what I've learned here.
Apparently.
Now I do.
It's not true. Brandon Sanderson deserves a Hugo. I don't know why he hasn't won one.
I googled it just now. One of Bujold's series is on the NPR Top 100 Science Fantasy, and it's her Vorkosigan.
Okay.
Yeah, Vorkosigan.
That's sci-fi.
Yeah, I want to read that.
Yeah.
That's a big commitment. There are a ton of books in that, but they're very good, and you should read them.
I just finished the third.
Yeah. You started with the free falling, though, right?
I did.
That's serious, but
shaking her head.
I'm judging you so hard right now.
I'm still waiting for that to become relevant.
It's not. It's not relevant.
Oh.
I'm just being a brat. So we're going to start moving into spoilers now. And we're going to start moving into spoilers because we're going to talk about the magic system. How do you guys feel about the magic system in this book?
I loved it. I think the most interesting thing about it was that both anyone could use the magic, but you didn't get a choice in it. The gods had to choose you actively to use their magic. Go ahead.
Well, you got some choice, right?
don't-
So like if you do the death magic, you still have to do the you gotta choose as somebody and do the ritual and kill yourself. So yeah, it's that was the bastard, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, so the bastard has to move through your act, but you still have to, make the first step, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
But it has to be, it's a two-way street. You have to want the gods' intervention, and they have to want to intervene on your behalf. Versus most magic systems are just, you're special. You can do
You read a
magic.
book.
You're,
You learn a
you're
spell.
one in a million. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and one of the very interesting things that they talk about during the funerals is it's the one miracle everybody gets, is the god picks you up after you die and takes you to wherever. But that's the thing that attracted me most. There's other types of magic in the world, by the way. They're just not discussed in this book. So
I really like learning about the gods. I don't know how related this to the magic, but I really like learning about the gods and their relationship with one another and what kind of magic and what kind of miracles they work based on their, I don't know, nature. And I was fine with it. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. I liked it. But I thought that aspect was interesting.
what do you think,
Yeah.
Panda?
I mean, it's not like a hard magic system or anything, but it's got enough substance to be interesting and not be wishy-washy. There is logic. I mean, a lot of it is based in theology and like what Rabbit was saying. You know, the person did have to open themselves up to the gods, and allow the gods to pour themselves into the person to do the work. Um, but it's not something. It's not a kind of magic system that I've read a lot of. So it was pretty refreshing to me.
Well, I love it. I think it's great. Oh,
My favorite part about this system, though, is it gives so much more depth to the world, because we know Kaz gets chosen for a miracle, and we know why, and we see it happen. And we see a couple of other instances where people get miracles from the gods and they get the gods' magic. But there's also characters that we don't learn about why they have magic. Like there's the dedicat of the mother, I believe, that's just a midwife. And there's the judge who can tell lies. And we don't know why, but obviously there's some purpose that the gods gave them that magic for. And it just adds a little bit more depth to the story, that there's more important things in the world going around than just your main characters and the protagonists.
speaking of her humor, one of the really funny things is that the judge says, "I can tell when people are lying." And he goes, "But actually, that's really not as helpful as you might think it is.
Mhm.
Like sometimes it's really not helpful at all." Anyway, oh, she has such dark humor. So does it work for you? I believe Pandas found a quote about speculative theology. Is what?
Oh, yeah, I've
Yeah.
seen
Does that?
it being described as speculative theology, which I think it makes sense, given that it's not just like, oh, here's a god and this is what they do. It's that the characters themselves are actually actively engaging in this conversation about the gods, right? I don't know how to say his name.
Oh my God.
Umagat. That conversation between him and Kaz, like, was what really helped me understand the theology happening in the world. And then, like, there are a whole bunch of books that have been written, and it's just it makes it more real and more believable.
Feels very lived in. The world does.
That guy was the saint, right? That
Mhm.
Kaz
Yes.
first met. I really liked him.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was great. Um, any other thoughts on this? I think it works really well for me. I'm a theology major. And so that's part of my interest in this book. Um, and there's two quotes that really worked for me. And one of them is when he's in, gosh darn it, I'm blanking on the country's name, guys. He's visiting the fox.
Ibra,
And
the country of Ibra. Is that what it is?
yeah,
Ibra.
right. Hi, Kat. And he says, he's praying and he's having all this horrible time with it. And he finally just gets up and he says, he suspected that as he hoisted himself up from the and turned to the door, that putting one foot in front of another is praying all the same. And I was just like, that's kind of like, he's not given the answers. He just has to keep working things through and doing the best he can. And maybe he gets a hit every now and then. Maybe some mules show up for him or something occasionally. Well,
You make it sound
Umagat
like a
does
drug.
describe it as a drug. He says that you get addicted to your god.
True.
So
True.
Yeah, speaking of that, I really like the way. So after Kaz meets the goddess, and like every time he's like, "Oh, I can't describe it. It's just indescribable," and it was the weirdest feeling ever. And then he just kind of got the feeling that every time he's talking to somebody, everyone's like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And I think after he talked to Umagad,
Mhm.
he said he was talking the same way, and at that point he realized how crazy he sounded to everybody else. I like
Or
that
when
point.
Ista says, "We'll just tell everybody you're pregnant with the demon who screams at you at night."
It's like, sure.
What's your favorite character and or scene?
I think I'd be surprised if everybody doesn't agree with me, but Kaz is great. Kaz is one of my favorite protagonists in any story. He's funny, he's smart, he's thoughtful. He has hopes and dreams, and you want them to work for him. And he's selfless, and he's kind, and he's broken, and I love him.
He's broken, but not beyond saving. And it's really interesting to watch him build himself back up, especially given all the horrors that he had to go through. And I do really, really like Kaz. Like at first, I wasn't sure about him, but then when he gets to Valinda, and
Mhm.
starts to tell the Provencara his story about being a slave and what happened. Like he was supposed to have been ransomed. And I was like, I am close to tears, and I've only read like a few chapters of this book. And my favorite scene is when Kaz is with the fox negotiating in quotes, the marriage contract, and how at that point you're just like you're not necessarily surprised by Kaz anymore, but it's still satisfying to see his wit and how loyal he is to Izelle. And even in that scene, like there's that humor where the fox is like, what can I offer you? Right. And Kaz is like, well, all the things you've offered me are for the living. Like I'm dying. So none of this matters to me. And then the fox is like, oh man, that Izelle, she's crafty. She sends a dying man to negotiate. And Kaz is like, well, she didn't, that wasn't really part of her plan, but sure, you don't need to know that. Like, just that kind of humor, that thought, that writing is so good.
Yeah, I forgot to mention my my favorite scene. That was a close second. But my favorite scene was similarly where someone's trying to bribe him, and it was Dondo, and he was trying to bribe him with his ring. And just the way that Kaz handles that situation was great. And he's like, I can't do this because if I do that, then it's going to have repercussions later. So I'm just going to say this in a very, very careful way. and he's playing the game right, but I really like that part, especially because I hate Dondo. I hate that guy. And later he sees the ring that he was trying to bribe with I think it was a captain, and he says to him, I think you should get that ring checked. I think it's not real. And he's like, no, it's a good ring. And he's like, well, I think it's garbage compared to what you got for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My favorite part about Kaz is how he spends all of his time trying to build up everyone around him, but in the end, they are what build him back up from being broken. So he puts all of his effort. He's already considers himself a dead man, if not about to die, but he thinks he has no life when he goes and visits the Profankara. He's like, I'd be happy as a dredge, a quiet servant just living out my days. And then she's like, no, I am going to give you a chance. You still have great things left to do in you. And then Acel and Betrez trusting him, and Umagat trusting him, and then the gods trusting him. And all of a sudden, now he's Chancellor of Chalion.
Mhm.
I don't know if I have a favorite scene, guys. This is a hard one for me, and I've been thinking about it for about an hour. So I'm just gonna go with I'm gonna go with the scene where Ista and Kaz are talking, and it's after Acel's been crowned, and they're having this whole conversation, and then he says, "Will you bless me?" And I just think that it gives me chills every time I read the blessing. So just so cool. And they're both ex-saints too, which is kind of funny. So what else do you guys want to talk about?
How about some criticisms,
Okay.
Panda?
Sure. Yeah, so my main criticism is that while a lot of the characters were pretty solid, I did find the villains to be a bit flat. Like with Dondo, I did hate him a lot. But I didn't quite understand his motivations other than he's kind of just evil. But I think part of it is that with the curse, it was supposed to have given the explanation of why Dondo and his brother Marteau were villainous. I I think though we didn't get enough substance to them. Like, yes, the curse kind of exaggerates um like their desires, but like why were they that way? So that's my main criticism. I don't know if other people had the same thoughts.
No, I get it. Like they kind of came off as like mustache twirling villains, and yeah, they kind of threw it away with like, yeah, they're already bad, but the curse makes them worse. I get it.
I just realized
For
I
me,
forgot to say my favorite character, which is Kaz. But I do want to give a shout out to Acel and Beatrice. I love them. They are
Beatrice?
just Beatrice, whatever.
Beatrice?
Whatever.
I like
Anyway,
Beatrice.
but they're just strong and they're clever and they're so brave, especially Acel, because what she's facing is a truly terrifying thing. So, anyway, my brave
Uh,
ladies.
yeah. You said that it was really brave of her, and I really it reminded me of the quote from Kaz, and he says, I thought I was taught about bravery from a Raknari slave vessel, but it's not. He was comparing it to her bravery, and it really moved me.
Yeah.
Do you have
I okay, just back to villains. I thought Dondo was kind of a poor villain, but his brother I thought was a pretty good villain because it even talked about what the curse corrupted in him, and so it corrupted his willingness or his desire to support his family and to raise up his family and for wealth.
That's
And
true.
you can see that Dondo was just a villain, a mustache twirler, but you can see his brother supporting that because of the curse. You can see that DiGiorno is a good chancellor. He did support the kingdom. He ruled the kingdom well when Oriko wasn't doing absolutely nothing. But then his blind spot turned because of the curse, and he let his brother get away with a lot and made his brother into the mustache twirling villain.
I think that's fair. Yeah, we did get more depth for Marteau than we did for Dondo.
Yeah.
How about Isel's brother-in-law? That guy was the worst.
Isel's brother-in-law.
Which one's
Well, the guy the one that sold her to Dondo.
Oh, the king Oriko?
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
Yeah,
that was
was
his
her
stepbrother.
half brother.
Yeah, her half brother. Yeah.
Well, her brother then.
Oh, yeah.
That guy annoyed me.
Awful.
He's like, I don't want responsibility. I'm gonna try to get my way around to this as much as possibly can. And that guy was awful. I hated him.
But
Well-
he's not. He's a victim in a lot of respects of everything he touches goes wrong.
I think for Oriko, it's at the end. They tried to make him to be not quite a villain, because I remember what they were saying is like, oh, he made a sacrifice. Like he gave the next generation an opportunity to be able to break the curse. And I think I have to read it again to really understand that. But I feel like with Bujold, there is something about Oriko that is meant to be more than just the, cursed, useless kind of character.
What Umagat says about him is that he's a tragic figure. He's not evil. He's just tragic.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I feel about him.
I don't necessarily have a criticism, but I've seen this said about the book, and I think I could definitely understand it. Some people have a problem with the age gap between Kaz and Beatrice. And personally, I love the love story.
It's so
I rarely read love stories, but like there is like a 17-year difference between them, and I can understand that bothering somebody, but I always get like little butterflies when he's talking about how much he likes her, and at the end of the story when they get married, and he's like holding her hand, and he's like, how can you give this maiden to me? And he said, but I won't let go of her hand. And they're like, well, he's like, you can't sacrifice a maiden to my gray hairs. And he's like, that's why we cut your hair. And he's like, we're not sacrificing her. This is her what was it?
Her boon.
Prize. Yeah, her boon.
Yeah.
And I liked
Love
it,
that
but I'm
scene.
just wondering what you guys think.
Oh, I love that story. It's just so sweet. And that part where she guesses that he went off and killed himself or used death magic, and she's like, I can't believe you'd only kiss me if you're on the verge of death or something like that. So great.
Yeah. I did. Was it 17 years? I thought it was like 30 to 19 or 30 to 20 years old.
He's 35 years old.
So it's 15, 16 years. Yeah. I thought he was younger than that. But
No. He's 36 at the end of the book. Sorry.
So with the age gap, I didn't have a problem with it. Mostly because like Beatrice, I really want to put an A in there. Beatrice
too.
and Casriel, they weren't like, they didn't meet when, she was like 12 and he was like 20 or 27 or whatever that age range would be. And they were pretty grown. Like Beatrice was pretty grown when they met, and she's a pretty mature person. And given the kind of like medieval setting, it's not that uncommon, especially when like Iselle is 16, and
I think so.
Bergen is he 14?
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, age kind of just goes out the window as long as it's consent and the people know what they're doing and can make their own decisions. So, yeah. Those are my
They're
thoughts.
And there also wasn't like a power dynamic there. That
Mhm.
makes sense.
Yeah, like he
So-
wasn't forcing her to do anything, and she chose him of her own free will. And like when you get older, the age gap is less and less of a issue.
Yeah, plus he was
I-
fully
I-
aware of how old he was, right? He's
Mhm.
constantly talking, well, if she thinks that's old, I wonder what she thinks about 35. Or he's like, yeah, she'll never love me. I liked it in his eye because he thinks like I think. Does that make sense? It's like if I were in that situation, this is exactly what I think, especially towards women. So good job, Bujold.
Rabbit.
Yeah, I think it still is a little bit. I think it's still too old by modern standards, but I think it was written in the 90s. I think, right?
Early 2000.
Early 2000s, and she has been writing since the 80s or 70s, so her perspective is a lot older than us. So I don't think I didn't mind it. I think if I think it would be a little bit too much in modern fantasy, but I did not mind it in this book.
Oh, you
I
should.
mean, I'm just thinking of a different book that I was reading where they were trying to betroth like a teenager to a toddler. Like the girl is a teenager and the king is a toddler, and it's just like, I mean, at least in that sense, it's more of a political move rather than like a, love romance kind of move. So that one is kind of like understandable, but even so, like I think you're right. Like if you go into the mindset with our modern kind of thinking, you're gonna be like, that's too much. And there are people who don't like that big of an age gap between the love interests.
I think the biggest difference of modern standards is the expectation of when you get married is much later for a lot of cultures now.
Mhm.
So when your expectation of when to get married is 25 or often even later, having someone who's well past that versus someone who's well before that seems like a much bigger difference.
Yeah, people were getting
But-
married very, very young.
But
In
when
those
you
days.
have two people of marriageable age, I think the age gap is less of a big deal.
Mhm.
So there's this one interesting aspect of Downton Abbey. I'm going to make this relevant. The girl brings home this guy who's like her dad's age, and he gets really upset and says, "Why don't you marry somebody your own age?" And she says, "Dad, all the men my age are dead," because it takes place right after World War I. And so, I mean, that's kind of part of the dynamic, you know.
I like that storyline. I'm
Okay.
a Downton Abbey fan.
Hmm?
I'm a Downton Abbey fan.
I actually never watched it. My mom just told me about it because I was reading a book about World War I at the time.
Oh, you should. It's so good.
And you don't watch, isn't it basically a soap opera?
I wouldn't call it a soap opera. No. It does have some pretty unbelievable things, but they never wrote anything that hasn't actually happened.
We are so off topic.
Yeah, we should.
I'm sorry, that's my fault.
I'm gonna edit out Downton Abbey. You should watch this.
Don't add
No.
no. It's great. It's wonderful. Beautiful content. So I think that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about, except that this cover art is terrible. And I don't know why. Who approved it? I know you liked it.
I think it's great. Are you talking about the gold cover with the raven or the crow?
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah.
It's ugly.
I think it's very striking, and
Oh.
I like the use of color. That's about it. I don't think it's bad, but I like the color.
Okay.
I saw
Huh.
this in the bookstore. I don't think I would have picked it up. Like, I mean, the name of the book isn't that interesting to me, and the cover itself is
No.
kind of plain.
it's very generic.
Yeah, generic is a good word.
Once you've read the story, it makes sense and it's cool, but it's not going to catch anyone's eye.
No.
I
And you
do
guys,
find- oh,
how many
sorry.
books have you picked up because of the way they look? You're like, oh, that's a cool cover. I'm gonna look
a
at that.
lot.
A lot.
If it's a book I've already read and the cover art's like really cool, like a special edition, absolutely. But just because it looks cool, I've never read that.
Well,
I'll send
sorry,
you.
when I was a kid, I would pick up books off the shelf if they looked cool, and then I would read the summary. And if the summary looked good, that's when I would buy it.
Yeah.
But you have to get that initial, ooh, this looks cool. Let me see what it's about.
Especially when
I'll
there's so many books, right? Like, how do you choose which synopsis you're gonna read?
Maybe we should do a book cover episode. Best book covers.
But that's going to be a pain because you have to figure out which edition you're talking about.
We could just bring our own.
This is an
Well, right, no, but like
audio format. It's an audio format.
In the description, we can give pictures, right?
I guess.
Well,
Sure.
tangent.
Right,
Okay. Any last
closing
thoughts?
Yeah. Can we talk about the ending?
Okay.
I love the ending. I thought the ending was perfect. But I thought it was a little predictable. Does that make sense? So like you learn about the curse, then you learn how it's going to be, cured. Like somebody has to die 3 times, and you're like, well, that's definitely going to be Kaz. So that was a little obvious. And you're like, oh, somebody has to die 3 times, and you're thinking, that's one. Well, the other 2, and then she marries the prince, and okay, well, he saved himself for that one. And then you're thinking, oh, when's the 3rd time? But I really, really, really like the part where he gets stabbed and like the demon goes out. Yeah, I just thought it was really cool. And he's like, "Give me my love. I need to kiss her." And then she's like, "Okay, I could die now." Did you guys love the ending as much as me?
Oh, I cried. I loved it so
yes.
much.
Also, for contender for favorite scene, talking about Betrayer's nose in poetry.
It's like the nose, the lips. And I love when he's talking to the guy, and he's like, "Man, yeah, the nose is not really. Yeah, we talked about the lips." He's like, "Well, if that were the
Lay
case,
down the
wouldn't we talk
nose.
about?"
Why don't we talk about their nether regions?
And like he pissed her off, and she's like, "He's like, I really like her nose." But I love the conversation between him and the other guy, and he's like, "Yeah, we use poetry to get to a woman's, things that we want." And he's like, well, if that were the case, wouldn't we talk about this? And he's like, well, they'd probably never talk to us again. He's like, lips are a good,
Halfway.
yeah.
Pally is so wonderful. I love him.
Mhm.
And his cousins.
I did like the twist of the 3 times dying, of one of them being well before the events of the books, on the slave galley. So it's like he wasn't even counting that. But I think part of that was the law of consequences, in effect, is because you don't even know how far back Kazriel's story started. Because I mean, he kind of intuits that it's the slave galley was the start of his story, but I mean, you could argue it went back even further when he joined the military in the first place, or even before that. So I think that was super cool.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's why it's so satisfying to get to the end, because Bujold pulls all these pieces together, right? She's laid down the brickwork, and you're not, by itself, it's like, oh, this is cool backstory. This really like helps flesh out the character. But then she's like, yes, but here's another purpose for it. Like, this is how it influences the ending. And you're like, ah. So it is very satisfying, and I would say like the part about the 3 deaths was also a good way of like an example of the theology at work, but also the explanation of he needed to die the first 2 times to prepare for the 3rd death. Like, that explanation was very, very effective for me.
Yeah, definitely. So, if you love this book, what should you read next? Besides everything that she ever wrote.
Well, obviously, Paladin of Souls, the
Right.
basically sequel to this.
So, but not her. Like another book. You like this? I have one.
One
Go
of
ahead.
one of my first thoughts after reading this was it ran me a lot of Tamora Pierce's writing. And Pierce is much more YA than
Right.
Bujold, but it's a very, very similar style of writing. I would call it the journey to the destination, where how you get to the end is as important to what happens at the end. There's not that many big twists in it, but the actual storytelling is just fantastic.
Also lots
Completely
of use
agree.
of Deus Ex Machina those stories as well.
Yeah, particular in the trickster duology that a few of us just read. I saw quite a few similarities there.
Need to read those.
You should.
They're very quick.
If I could recommend one, I'm not a huge fan of Robin Hobb, but I thought that this story was a lot like the Assassin's Apprentice trilogy, except for the protagonist being a young boy. And from what I understand, the later books in the series are what was the protagonist's name again?
Fitz.
Fitz, thank you. Fitz as an older man, so maybe that would help. But the court intrigue remind me a lot of Curse of Chalion, although I thought Curse of Chalion for me personally was much better.
So
And the writing style of not having an action-based fantasy story is much more about the characters and the character growth and development rather than sword fighting or magic slinging.
Yeah, I actually do have another recommendation. The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. Kieran's just really excited. It was probably the first like adult fantasy that I read that wasn't action driven, and it was very, very character driven. And some people think it's boring because not a lot of things happen, but I really enjoy I really enjoyed getting to know Maya and like how Maya navigated the court and the politics and being it is a younger protagonist, but if you enjoy the kind of slower moving pace but very character driven and likable protagonist, then I would recommend The Goblin Emperor.
Yeah, thank you for that. Maya is a lot like Kaz, I think,
Hmm.
in his kindness and his well, he's a lot more, I wouldn't say naive, but he's a lot less experienced than Cav, but he's just as kind and just as wonderful to be inside their head of.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's one of my favorite parts in The Curse of Chalion, where Bergen, I think, was the one that asked Kaz, like, why were you kind to me? And Kaz is just like, why not? Like, I didn't have anything to lose, like, and I think that's one of the themes that it shines in this book, which is, you know, don't judge a person by their appearance. You never really know like who they are, how they could be influencing your life. Um, I think Umagat is a really good example where he appears to be just a groom, but in reality, he's a divine. And yeah, there are a lot of good messages in this book.
Yeah, I think there's a very egalitarian theme. Maybe not necessarily between the sexes, but I mean, women do hold a lot of power, but between the classes. So after Kaz has a penchant for speaking in ways that make nobles really uncomfortable, especially about his past and about how they're not really any better than people below them, but in a way that makes them think and be like, oh, I better get away from what he's talking about. And I don't know, do you have any thoughts about that?
So oh geez, I did for a second. Now it's gone. There's a scene where he's talking to Pally and he's telling him his story about what happened to him. And Pally says, "Stop saying slaves, stop saying slaves." And he responds, something about how that we're men or we're men or we're animals, and I've never seen that noble blood had anything to do with that.
Yeah, another scene that popped out was when I think somebody drowned, and he's like, "Well, when you're drowned, you look the same as somebody who's noble and who's lower born, so it doesn't really matter."
Yeah.
Another major theme, of course, which is present in the magic and in Kaz himself, is sacrifice. And I was really moved by his sacrifice. But you have to sacrifice something for the gods. You have to sacrifice something in yourself. He's always sacrificing himself for the Chalion family, and I really like that.
So I'm going to recommend something, and it's called The Spirit Lens by Carol Berg. And it's a failed magician who has become the librarian at the college, the magical college that he failed at. And the king asks him, who's a cousin of his, asks him to help him solve a mystery. So there's court intrigue. He's also older. And yeah, so there you go. You like court intrigue, you like mysteries, you like broken old men. There's the book for you. Well, how many times will it take us to record the outro? Thanks so much for joining us. What? Oh, shut up. Thanks so much for joining us for our chat on Lois McMaster Bujold's The Curse of Chalion. Consider supporting the Legendarium on Patreon and joining the discussion on Reddit and Discord. I would like to give a special shout out to Our Lady of Sweden, who helped me workshop a whole bunch of this, and Panda also, for also helping me workshop it. And I would like to thank Horizon Brave, because this is all his fault. Have a good night, guys.
Bye.
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 Music is Galactic Damages by Jingle Punks.